Welcome, indie game developers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour, the best dang indie game podcast on the planet.
Today we're being joined by Loren Weng to talk about evolution in roguelike game design.
Wow.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear real stories of indie game development from real indie developers, as well as directly ask them questions in the second half of each episode.
This is a recording of a weekly event we host in the Indie Game Academy Discord on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, so feel free to swing by for the next one.
We're your hosts, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster here at IGA, and the Wizard of Games.
And I'm Tim Wood, founder of Rightfinder Headhunting and the Knight of Games Recruitment. And joining us today is Loren Weng, co-founder at Daruma Games.
Wow. Loren, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you here. I actually met Loren during one of our 24-hour streams where I got to play their game Soulmates, which has been a lot of fun, which is a little bit of a roguelike. I've forgotten. Why did I just forget the name? And what's the game? Loren, what's the game?
Overcooked.
Overcooked. It's Overcooked in space, but spaceships. If you like FTL or Guns of Icarus is one it reminded me of. Imagine hectic Guns of Icarus in space. Loren, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here. What are you having for lunch today, my friend?
I think we're having a big bowl of talking about games. My favorite thing to do every day.
I think is that the first time we've ever had somebody answer like metaphysically? Like usually people are
I
like,
love it.
"Oh, I'm just drinking coffee." Yeah.
You know, it's nutrition for the soul. I like that.
Indeed. That's what we have every Wednesday. Well, awesome. Thank you for being here, Lauren. So the first question we always like to jump in to get the ball rolling is to tell us that origin story. So, Lauren, where are you in games today, and how did you get there?
Yeah, so I guess where I am in games today is I am technically CEO of my of my company, Daruma
Yes.
Games. We started our indie venture, me and my co-founder Simon, about 2 years ago, and we've been working on our first project, Soulmates, and our demo just recently became live, so it's been our kind of like first foray into being in the public view for having people try our game out. So it's really been uh, particularly exciting times for us. Now, for my history, I'm Taiwanese. I grew up in Taiwan. Came to the U.S. for college, but my love for games started, way before then. I think my first interaction with making games was coming to the U.S. for a summer camp, and one of the TAs there taught me that it was possible to program on a TI-84, and that was kind of my first experience into. And then I was like, oh, making games is so easy, and I've been proven wrong over and over again over the next 20 years. It's very easy to start making games now. Like finishing a game is a completely different story. And my kind of first professional experience was after college. I joined Warner Brothers San Francisco, who I think, as everyone knows, has like an amazing stable of IPs underneath them. I got to work on games that were set in DC Comics, in the Harry Potter world, um, and also get to see lots of like Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones content, and all that fun stuff. I think the game I'm particularly proud of working on while I was there was the Harry Potter Wizards Unite game, which was a collaboration with Niantic, where it was kind of like Pokemon Go for Harry Potter, and I happily led design on lots of small little features there that, um, except the game is down now, which is I think
Oh,
fallen prey to the landscape of live service free to play games, and
Yeah.
but it will always have a special place in my heart.
mhm.
And after the pandemic, I came out of it being like, you know, people really could use some more couch co-op games to help remind them of, the fact that they have friends and that they used to kind of get together and, do things together instead of everything online. And so I was like, I got to be the change I want to see in the world. And so I started working on one
Oh.
myself.
That's awesome. I love that last sentiment during the pandemic. I remember that time period and just like all of the weird stuff that we all played together. The You kind of skipped a part there. You were like, yeah, and then I guess I took a job at Warner Bros. How did that happen?
So I think my parents were on the cautious side when I went to school. I was hell bent on being like, I want to go to school for game design, and they were like, how about you take like a real major, and then if you after you go to college, you can still you still want to make games, maybe you can consider doing it. And so I took a computer science degree, and after graduating, thanks to the alumni office of our school, they connected me with someone that was working in games. That they had like background working in like Zynga and other places in San Francisco. So, I was supposed to join their startup, and then about like 3 months before I was supposed to join this indie startup, they were like, "Oh, just kidding! I got hired by Warner Brothers, so that job is now gone. How would you like to follow me to Warner Brothers?" And I was like, "Well, it's
Whoa.
still games," and I came to San Francisco for that.
Holy crap. That's a pretty good deal, honestly.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Wow. I also I relate to the TI-84, so I barely played with it. I did get to play with it the tiniest bit. What I played with more than that randomly was a 1984 Radio Shack branded computer that ran BASIC. I made some of my first games on that. But my brother made many games. He's the one who sort of introduced me to game development and taught me some of my very first game dev skills. He made many games on our shared TI-84, including my favorite, which was I think it was called Fight Night, maybe, and it was a text-based fighting game. So you
Hell yeah.
like type in which punch you want to do and stuff. It was dope. It was game of the year for sure.
Actually, you
That's
just
Amazing.
reminded me of a lost history of mine because
Yeah.
it was my first, I guess, like forays into like kind of like public facing game design, which wasn't just on my calculator, would be actually on these good old Flash sites, which rest in peace were like
Yes.
the best place to be on the internet in the early 2000s. I was
Absolutely.
a bit being overseas, I think I was a little bit out of the like the Newgrounds crowd, but like the later ones that came, your Armor games, your Addicting games, your Congregates and whatnot. Like I would be posting games there, and had a grand old time doing it.
Yeah, I also adored Flash game development. This is a part of my origin is sort of half accidentally selling my. I think it actually was literally my first like full like completed game to addictinggames.com. They wanted to pay me $1,000, but I had already put it on Newgrounds, so they paid me $500 instead for a non-exclusive license. But at 15, I was like, "What? Like I could get paid?" And it was all downhill from there.
yeah, they hooked you in, didn't they?
Hmm. Do you want to
Oh,
jump in with our intro here? Yeah.
yeah. So I've got a question for you, Lauren. So obviously you've worked at some major studios such as Warner Brother Games, and of course now CEO co-founder of Daruma Games. So what is it that's drawn you specifically to roguelike game design? And how has your perspective of the genre evolved over time as you kind of first discovered it to where you are now?
I think I'll talk. I think from a practical sense, what's been drawing me to it was that my trajectory that I always aimed for in games, and is kind of the trajectory I'm following now. The reason I joined a big game company was kind of gain experience and also gain the connections I needed to eventually one day have the people and the skills to like work on my own games in an indie sense. And so uh, the I think one of the reasons I've always been very focused on roguelike game design is because I think just a lot of shining examples in indie game space are amazing roguelikes that exist. And I think the particular reason why like indies and roguelikes are such an amazing kind of like fusion together is just because the procedural generated kind of um like emergent gameplay style design is so well suited for small teams, and like you don't have enough time to kind of handcraft every single experience for your players. And so like kind of figuring out the best way to like juice the multiplication factors of like, here's this upgrade system together with this type of progression with this type of kind of like character movement, and suddenly you have you know a billion different game experiences
Mm.
that like you're not tuning or I mean you're tuning for it, but you're not like you've never seen it yourself per se, is kind of like I think the amazing place for indie game devs to start.
I think indie dev is like very like quintessentially, or excuse me,
Mm.
roguelike is very quintessentially indie dev because it's a great mix of like resource efficient. You can make a game with a lot of depth and replayability without having to build too much stuff. And then it's also, I feel like, a great it's sort of an evergreen area of game design exploration, because there's so many different areas, so many different aspects that you can sort of build roguelike into. That's a ton of fun. I think it also plays upon our like gambling instincts, probably in a way that works well for indie and games in general. Like, who would have thought that battle royale would have worked out? Battle Royale dropped, the like providing game design thought at that point was that the player should win 70% of the time. And then somebody was like, psych, make it 1 out of 200 and they'll love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the kind of like increasingly interconnected world, I guess people are used to kind of being like one of many, and so like battle royales just kind of fulfill that little rat race that everyone feels like they're part of, except you can actually win this time.
Oh, yeah. Like the group chats when Fortnite first dropped at the Battle Royale mode, and I was sending my mates like, "Oh, I got second or I got first," and they're like, "Oh wow, so badass, Tim. I wish I was you." That never happened. But it really does help with that kind of, I guess, the UGC side of things to start throwing industry buzzwords around. Um, and roguelike games are like super popular, especially over the last decade or so. I mean, I've only just recently got into Vampire Survivors, but that has taken vast swathes of my life already. Like I've got it on my phone, I've got it on the computer. I've not seen my family in weeks. Um, but what are the core elements that, to kind of a layperson, you would say really make a roguelike, compelling, and how might those fundamentals be shifting over the next 10 years as well?
Yeah, I think what you've asked is a contentious question. If you talk to different people
Everybody
about
argue
what
with Lauren in the chat.
yes, please do. And I'll preface all of this by saying, like I am a like hugely passionate about roguelikes, but I'm not, like a historian or an expert like per se. Like I just think about it every
Yeah.
living moment of my life. So if you disagree with any of these things, or you think you have a different take, like please feel free to ask questions, or feel free to hunt me down on online or on Discord and tell me that I'm wrong. I'm very happy to hear it and have some healthy discussions. Now,
It's
uh,
spelled Lorenweng if you want to look up Lauren and tell him he's wrong.
that's right. Let me say
Just wanted to
hi
help
in the
out.
chat. Um, and yeah, I think if you look on Wikipedia or other places, like there, I think even back in the '90s, people were already talking about how to define a roguelike. Like there's, I think something called like something that sounds kind of like the Berlin conjecture or something like that, where like people like kind of like try to approximate what they think roguelike meant, and then there's like
Hmm.
soft parts of it and hard parts of it. I think the thing that everyone will agree on is that it has um, strongly procedurally generated elements, which means that it's not kind of like discrete or bespoke game design moments. Like they tend to have interlocking systems that, for example, have lots of randomness to it, so that every time you play the game, it's going to be slightly different. I think another very strong aspect of it is what people generally think called permadeath, which would be
Hmm.
when you're in the middle of like a gameplay run, or I guess run-based structure is also another term that people tend to use. When you're in the middle of like a singular kind of play session of the game, if you were to fail, most of the time you would have to start approximately near the beginning. Now, this is where the definition gets even more complicated because people started talking about roguelites and roguelikes, and and it takes so much enunciation just to even have people understand which one
Lite
you're
versus
talking about.
Like. Yes.
Exactly. And then people will sit there kind of splitting hairs about what constitutes a roguelite versus a roguelike. And I have my own personal definition as well. But uh like other elements can often include things like it's turn based. It's you are like a tile based map that's moving around, because like a lot of it is like if you're gonna be actually talking about roguelike, you might be thinking about the original Rogue, which I think a lot of people this day and age, including myself, have not actually played it. Um, and then you have your roguelites where people talk about things like permanent progression. Now my own personal line in the sand I draw for what's the difference between a LIKE and a LITE is whether or not there's kind of significant meta progression that exists in the game. I think if thinking about pure roguelikes, there tends not to be any source of permanent power for you to gain. So if you're thinking about games like Vampire Survivors or Hades, where like, as you kind of play more of the game, you gain, more like actual power that
Yeah.
you get to purchase and become become better at the game through that kind of mechanic. I think of those as roguelites. And then for me, roguelikes would be kind of your your FTLs, your Slay the Spires. Like like my line includes the if you have anything that you unlock, but it's not something that's like technically real power that you're granting yourself, then I still for me falls on the side of a roguelike.
Mm.
Interesting. I actually this is I'm a game designer, so I feel like I've done something wrong here. I don't really distinguish between roguelite versus roguelike. But now I feel like I competently can. Roguelite being you suggesting that roguelite including a meta progression, meaning you can power scale in between rounds. So the second time I play, I will be slightly more powerful. I am actually progressing the longer I play. That actually makes a lot of sense because it's light, it's less intense. It gives you some of the same vibes of the first roguelike game, but is nicer to you. Speaking of it, did you ever play the first roguelike game? I'm realizing I have to do that.
I don't think I've ever met anyone that's actually played the original Rogue. I think we're
It's
getting
called
to the
Rogue,
age
right?
where
Yeah.
yeah, it's just literally
Yeah.
Rogue.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are like pretty familiar with the general mechanics that go into it, but yeah, it's a rarity these days. I think for people to know the OG.
Super fascinating. I have a
Yeah.
so the what I pulled out of that, the four that I heard from that was number one, some sort of procedural generation, number two, permadeath, number three, run-based structure, and number four, permanent progression if we're talking about a rogue light.
Mhm.
Is that correct in your eyes? Is that summarize a roguelike?
I think that's generally it. One of my favorite charts to see in memes is like when they do like kind of like the D&D alignment chart, except that it's for like form radical versus like form traditional, and then and so like I'm sure like on the chart of alignments you can be like you can technically classify this as a roguelike versus like this is definitely a roguelike, and then everyone's gonna put their games on different sides of that scale. I think the number one most important thing is like kind of like the output of the gameplay that you see, and the output is kind of what I spoke to earlier, which is emergent gameplay. Like there's lots and lots and lots of amazing moments where like you get to do a thing that maybe no one else in the world has ever done before, because the kind of like all the different gameplay systems have come together to give you a specific specific seed on a specific kind of build that you're going for, and then you've created a thing that is unique to you.
Fascinating. I have a little side question for you. I've been thinking about this lately. So, procedural generation is something that I ran into pretty early in my career and is like such a sort of powerful, fascinating, tricky tool for game developers. So, procedural generation, if somebody is unaware, is you creating some form of algorithm that creates content for your game. So, in the Borderlands games, you procedurally generate weapons by basically sticking together pre-generated parts into something that you can actually, fight with. There's a ton of games that have procedural map generation. No Man's Sky has procedural planet generation, where it's using an algorithm that the developer like pre-created, decided how this planet would get created, and that builds out a planet. So we're now in the age of LLMs, large language models, and AI. Is procedural generation on its last legs? Are we at the end of using ProcGen as a tool rather than using AI solutions?
I personally don't think so. I think that's
Mm.
like games games are a way for this is the romantic part of me. It's a way for like the creator to like connect with their audience in a way that's like here's the intended experience that I wanted you to have, and then you're like I've received that, or it's like I reject your reality and replace it with my own. Um,
I'm savage.
but but when it comes to LLMs, I think they're like amazing assist tool in writing code.
Mhm.
I personally disagree with its usage in art, which I think even major companies are struggling with that question nowadays.
Yeah.
For for our game, we don't use any Gen AI, but you know, I think that's if you were to like just like use LLMs to like generate a game, you can't start that dialogue. Like there's no intent behind like what you were trying to create. Like sure, like like there's some that goes into the prompts that you engineer, but like it's only going to be able to kind of copy what's already there, and it's not going to really be able to
Mhm.
like generate something that really is kind of breaking ground. And we're talking about the evolution of roguelike game designs. So, like it's good like your LLMs are going to be able to kind of like remix and recreate things that people have already created, but like for true evolution and reaching like new frontiers of fun, I think it's always going to be handmade.
Mm. Is the so our Tim asked that question a little bit earlier about what makes for a proc gen game, and then what is the future of proc gen games. I'd love to get your thoughts on that second part. So what is in your mind? How will roguelikes change? You gave us the topic, the evolution of roguelike game design. What is the evolution? What can we expect in the next decade?
Yeah, I like I'll talk a little bit about kind of like the I guess like recent-ish history of like things that have I guess changed in roguelike game design, and then I'll talk about what I think some parts of the frontier. Now there's like it's a massive frontier, so I'm not going to cover everything, but I'll talk about the things that I personally am interested in. So I think a lot of people in the chat have been talking about Slay the Spire being like their introductions to roguelike. I think for me that's also one of the earlier games that I experienced. Although if you're talking about like the early ones, I'd talk about games like Spelunky, Binding of Isaac, FTL, all favorites of mine, and like kind of like the early 2010s were kind of the first modern wave of like small indie teams kind of creating roguelike games that have still stuck around in the modern cultural consciousness. I think if once you go further back, we've gotten to games that have generally been kind of like passed by as kind of like modern contenders for your attention. And by the time we reached Slay the Spire, I think we reached kind of like one of the first big modern milestones of like roguelike evolution, where I think Slay the Spire really was the popularization point of the roguelike deck builder. We have seen so many people cite kind of like inspirations from FTL, and so many games these days have taken like pages from kind of like roguelike deck builder mechanics from like AAA games. Like you look at your Back for Blood with like a deck system in there. You look at your AAA kind of gotcha games nowadays, your ZZZs or your Wuthering Waves, and people are taking like, kind of like little bits and pieces of the deck building element. The other, I think, system that's I don't know if there's a kind of unified name for it, but I always use the Say Aspire's name for it, which is the Ascension system, where
Mm.
you have kind of like a crank your own heat um, and make it as spicy as you want type gameplay system is a thing that I feel like kind of Slay Aspire helped popularize. Where you look at a lot of uh, successor games, your Monster Trains, even your Hades, and like people have kind of like started started to adopt like or even your Balatros adopt like there's a baseline difficulty that come into the game, and then as you play the game more and more, you start unlocking higher and higher difficulty levels for yourself, so that but they're not necessary for you to enjoy the game. But for people that want a higher challenge, that exists. I think that's like those two kind of like ideas are things that kind of like stuck around in cultural consciousness since Slay the Spire. And then I think Hades to me is like another big step that I consider to be one of the frontiers of roguelike game design, which is storytelling in roguelikes. Uh, I think prior to Hades, like most of the time, you see a lot of um, like indirect world building per se. Like you can obviously fit lots of things like like Souls like style storytelling where you have items and flavor text that like help you build like an image of what the world is. But in terms of a proper story that kind of like lives lives along with your playthrough progress and acknowledges the fact that you're restarting like a run over and over again, and then there's even like randomness to like the bits of story and still like telling a coherent story. I think Hades really pushed the volume on that, and I'm very much looking forward to uh where people try to go next. And I myself for Soulmates and also trying to kind of like lean more on like trying to use the roguelike vehicle to tell a story that makes sense in the context of you starting a run over and over again.
It sort of segues me perfectly. I wanted to hear a little bit about Soulmates in particular. So, for those who haven't yet played the game, there will be a link in the description. There's a free demo out right now. It's something like an FTL meets an Overcooked. So it's this frantic multiplayer experience where you are going through space together and trying to survive dangerous missions against all kinds of baddies. It's kind of interesting though. So we talked earlier about how the pandemic influenced you to want to make something that was just fun and airy and silly. But that compulsion sort of flies in the face of what roguelikes typically are. Roguelikes are typically like one of the core like emotional pillars of roguelikes is that they're frustrating. You get really far and you care about your character or your run or whatever, and then you die. And I think until a player is desensitized to that, it's a real hotbed for frustration. So tell me a little bit about this choice to create Soulmates and this choice to create something that's a little bit more silly, airy, and socially fun in a game genre that is not at all known for silly fun.
I think that actually was going to be my next point was within the last couple of years we've seen like huge games that I think are reaching success on a scale that previous roguelikes had not hit. I'm talking about games like Balatros, games like Vampire Survivors, and I think that speaks to I think just a maturing of the game audience in kind of like their tolerance for, I guess, traditionally more hardcore mechanics. It really has opened up like the roguelike audience to become like more of a just to include like a larger group of people that has like more casual gameplay. I think uh recently we've been seeing like a surge in like gambling roguelikes, which I think largely is attributed to, the poker kind of underpinnings of Balatro. And so uh to me it's not necessarily that I'm making the game easier. It's people have like gained that appetite for tackling, like the
Mm.
roguelike harder style content. Um one of the things my mentor always used to say, and I'm gonna steal the words from him, is there's like a class of quote unquote really hard problems in game design, and some of them are kind of cursed. I think the particular one we've chosen to bear on this project is co-op roguelikes. I tend to think of as a very hard problem
Mm.
because kind of like the power fantasy and the procedural generation of roguelike um, sometimes goes at odds with the kind of cooperative gameplay where you end up with issues like someone becoming too powerful, and then now they're kind of quarterbacking your gameplay where
Mm.
like a single person, because like there's these very spiky spikes in power level in the game, is capable of kind of like killing everything, and everyone else can kind of just sit back and watch. um I haven't played that much of Risk of Rain 2, but I have seen like certain like kind of paradigms emerging games like that, and I think that's still something that hasn't been purely figured out in the design space. So
Mm.
to kind of like circumvent that issue for us in Soulmates, we kind of made it so that instead of like individual kind of player power, it's you're all managing a ship that is kind of gaining the upgrades that you go along the way, so that each of you kind of like act as cogs to make sure the roguelike machine keeps running, instead of everyone having like an internalized kind of power level that is being compared to each other.
Mm. Interesting. The something I want to pull out there just for everybody who is on their game development journey. It took me a while to start thinking about the meta progression of gamers, as in how the entire industry's appetite for games changes over time. Because that is absolutely a thing. So something you're pointing out here, we can all think of ourselves and how we developed as developers, excuse me, as players. I can remember playing Slay the Spire and getting so frustrated and like finally beating the first boss and being like, yeah, and then dying immediately in Act 2 and be like, at this point in time, like Slay the Spire is almost a cozy game to me, and so are most roguelikes.
That's
I
right.
have been permanently changed by this genre, so it's easy for me to identify that happened to me, but it's harder to think about the fact that the entire landscape has changed, that players are now used to roguelikes, and roguelikes are almost a more, maybe not cozy, but definitely a more comfortable, at least, genre. I think largely because of the indie efforts in the space.
Yeah, that's something that like I kind of like debate to myself off like a ton of the time in my marketing thoughts, because it's like I think even if you go back just 3, 5 years ago, like if you're kind of like trying to advertise your game, you'd never lead with the fact that it's a roguelike because
Mhm.
you don't think everyone has that shared vocabulary yet. And I'm still not sure if kind of like the general audience is at a point where you can just say roguelike and they know exactly what you're talking about because there's still kind of like that softness in the definition. But like it's definitely something that like more often than not you're gonna get people nodding their heads when you're like, oh yeah, it's a roguelike that, like combines the
Yeah.
gameplay of this and that. So we really are kind of growing as a race towards our acceptance of
Ah,
randomness.
a holy roguelike.
We might have started another movement right here, right now. I love it.
Get a
So,
tattoo.
yeah, I might. I haven't got a tattoo yet. I should. But no, Lauren, we often ask our guests to prepare kind of an activity or a question for our audience to interact with. So, have you got one of those for us today?
I do, but I think before we get to the question, there's one more thing I want to talk about, which is like I
Go for
think
it.
like the cutting edge of roguelike evolution that I want everyone to pay I'm very much like looking forward to it at a close attention scale, which is I think the new frontier, and I discovered this game maybe like 4 years ago, and it's recently in this year just hit the US, is a game called Uma Musume, or it's a roguelike horse racing game that's come from Japan, and being from Japan, it's got lots of kind of like anime uh pinnings to it. But the thing that I think is most interesting is because I've
Pretty
been living in
Derby,
the
is that it?
yes, that's right.
Musume Pretty Derby? Okay.
Yes. And the thing that's so interesting about it is because I've been living in the free to play game space for a very long time. And like one of the difficult things is combining the free to play genre with a roguelike because
Mm.
like I think the kind of like microtransaction type structure like kind of inherently is at odds with the self-realization get like really really powerful. Like you can't pay for the kind of like upgrades that roguelikes tend to give you. And I think what Uma Musume has done, and there's a couple of other kind of like Asian games that are already taking on this design style, but I think it hasn't really hit the West yet, is they've created a game structure where each roguelike run generates like a saved profile of how well that run did. And then you take that saved profile and then you use that to do things. And so, like for example, in the Uma Musume game, they use it for PvP. So, like let's just say using Slay the Spire as an example, you end up at the end of a run and you have like an amazing kind of like barricade, like shield type based deck. And then in the PvP of a game like this, they'll be like, here's a mode. Here's a PvP mode where you have to bring in something that like fits this criteria, and then you take like that saved amazing run that you had, and then you bring it into like a subsequent thing, and so like it kind of like as you play more and more runs in the game, you start generating profiles that have kind of like different attributes to them, and then you can specifically play like the run in a way that generates like a save profile. You're like, I'm specifically taking this card because I know if like this run goes well, I'll have a save data that so having like
Oh.
persistence after your run that cares about like how well you did in that run and like the like the things that you achieved is something that I think is just really like an amazing kind of evolution in roguelike gameplay. I'm very much looking forward to when like Western devs start adopting this style of gameplay.
That's cool.
Is so cool.
Yeah.
Like when I first heard about it, like there was no English translation at all, and so like I was sitting there for like an hour in like a Japanese stream. I'm like I cannot understand anything they're saying, but I'm fascinated by
Yeah.
what they're cooking here. Cool.
Wow.
So
No,
you were
blown my
asking
mind
about
slightly there. But no, it's asking if you've got like a question of the day or an activity for our lovely audience here today.
yes, and it's kind of like one of my favorite icebreaker questions for just friends and also my new friends in chat here is uh, everyone I think has ideas cooking in their head about the games they want to make or the games they want to see. And I think an easy question is like it's X but roguelike, like in the same way that Balatro is, it's poker but roguelike, or like Noita is like it's the Falling Sands game but roguelike. Like if you can think of one, like what is a game that if you heard like it's X but roguelike, you'd immediately be like, I'm in. I don't even really care like what the gameplay is, but I'm already invested in what that is. I
I
think
love
for
that as like
Simon, like
I was
oh,
just
I'm
gonna
sorry.
say for so fill those out in the chat for us. This is an easy one. What would you be obsessed with if it was X but roguelike? To cut you off, Lauren, tell us what you got.
Oh yeah, no problem. I think for Simon, my co-founder, it'd be like if it's Tetris but roguelike, he'd be like, I'm immediately in. Or it's Minesweeper but roguelike.
That's an indie success story waiting to happen right there. It's one of those like old school, early, simple games, but somehow gussied up with more modern mechanics like that. We're
Mm-hmm.
already seeing a bunch of them pop in. I feel like I have to make the joke. What if it's Chrono Trigger but roguelike? I don't know what that looks like, but I adore Chrono Trigger, so I would still buy it. I have no idea.
Uh,
What about you, Tim? What would you do?
I've got two ideas. Number one, like I recently watched gameplay of FPS chess, which was hilarious. Every time you take a piece,
Oh,
those two pieces duel it out in like a gunfight. So
that's awesome.
maybe roguelike chess. But also just had the idea now, like something like GTA but roguelike. So you start off as a civilian, and then in your run, the more crimes you commit at a 5-star rating, you get a card for that kind of that charge, and then that gives you a power set that you can use on your next run. So, you know, if you keep racking up like littering crimes, you get really good at littering and not getting caught for it, for example.
I'm the jaywalking build.
Yeah, you're like a jaywalking speed run.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. There's a bunch of good ones already coming in from chat. If you are listening to this podcast recording after the fact, I want you to give yourself a couple in the car or wherever the heck you're listening to this at the gym. A couple of them are pretty fun. Mountain Blade, but roguelike.
Yeah, Mountain Blade's a
Interesting.
sick game. I mean, I've got a couple more 100 hours to put into something like that. Let's do it.
Or
I think if I
Hotline
were to think
Miami
of
roguelike. Oh yeah, yeah.
if I were to think of something like the a little bit more offbeat, but like really interesting, kind of like indie roguelike gems. For me, there'd be like the Necro Dancer series, where they're like, oh, it's like
Ooh,
rhythm
Yeah.
game, but roguelike.
yeah.
And then there's also Against the Storm, which is like, what if I had an RTS but it was roguelike, which I think are like really, really interesting little games that don't have too many compatriots yet.
Super interesting. So keep dropping us some ideas in the chat. I want to make sure we have sometime roguelike minigames inside other games. Ooh, interesting, Amani. I want to make sure we have some time for some community questions. So I'm going to jump straight into those. I'm going to grab one from LinkedIn just because it's easy. Michael asks, how important do you see the story and world building as compared against the core gameplay of a roguelike? I guess what signals have you seen that imply how important the story is to this audience?
I think we can kind of like just like speak to history, where it seems like the story itself is not like the core focus of the majority, like the vast majority of roguelike games. Now, like there's roguelike games like where you'll have lore, but in terms of like a roguelike game that's like trying to tell like a kind of like coherent story, I'd say that's kind of on the rarer side. And um, I think that's something that has kind of like become more and more like more and more often, like than not, people tend to like go forego the story. Like if you go back in the day, your Binding of Isaacs or your FTLs, I think you still had a pretty heavy amount of like implied story in there. But like once you've gotten to like the pure crystallized version of like gameplay and roguelike addiction, like with games like Balatro, I think we're getting to like the you almost need no story whatsoever to have a good roguelike. Now, that's not to say that like I don't think roguelike games should have story. I think they definitely can, and if you take the effort to like inject story, I think it will make your roguelike game even better.
So, another question we have from the chat is, have you seen any other game mechanic in a game, like roguelike mechanics, that you think could also become their very own genre?
Um, I think like the top of my mind right now, tip of my tongue right now is like what people are calling the friend swap genre. Now, I tend to think of those as kind of like first person proximity chat enabled games, your repos, your peaks, and we've definitely been seeing like a massive surge of that. And I pay a lot of attention to it because we also work in the co-op space, and I think the forefront of like new cool things is just like people realizing that this new technology is now kind of easily accessible to indie game devs. You saw that with the battle royales, where like 100-person connections used to just not be feasible, and then now it's like, oh, easy to implement a proximity chat is now like something that's feasible. And so like I think people are there's still a lot of innovation space for people to explore in this kind of like emergent genre.
I've been waiting for this question to get answered because I have a to be asked because I have an alternative one that hasn't blown up. Do you know what a Zelda randomizer is?
I do.
So I'm waiting for that to become its own genre. I don't know. So a Zelda randomizer, or just a randomizer. There's other games that do it, but I got introduced to it watching Ocarina of Time randomizers. The idea is basically all items that would be acquired in a chest. So your Megaton hammer, your Master Sword, whatever, or I guess Master Sword isn't in a chest. You get it. Are randomized. That's the typical way that they start. So one chest where I would normally get the Kokiri sword, now I get the boomerang, and I have to play through Zelda with the boomerang instead of the Kokiri sword. And it's fascinating. They have an algorithm that basically stops any, or at least for the most part, stops any hard locks. So you will always be able to solve and move forward. But instead of going through and doing the fire dungeon or doing the forest dungeon, you wind up doing like 3 rooms of the fire dungeon, getting stuck and going back to the forest dungeon and finding a chest over there that happens to get your next key for some other dungeon or whatever. I've been super fascinated by this, and one of those game ideas that I would love to build at some point would be something of an intentional randomizer where the world gets more and more chaotic. You build a short Zelda game that you play like 6 times, where the actual world gets more and more randomized over time. I feel like the randomizer mechanic, it's something just like a roguelike for that matter, but it's a little bit more specific, I guess. That could fit, I feel like, in a couple of different genres.
I like that.
Yeah. Just like a
Yeah.
shuffled Metroidvania, as Batunio points out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting point, and I think we've seen like maybe a little bit of that DNA in like games like Silksong or like modern day
Mm.
Metroidvanias, where I think the more traditional Metroidvanias tend to be relatively linear in the kind of like things that they want you to acquire in this order, so that you can kind of like progress the game in the way that they intend. And uh, with like more and more speedrunners in our midst, like we've been seeing like people just sequence break things in all these new Metroidvanias. You're like, oh yeah, it turns out you never need double jump to even finish the game, and so I think we're moving towards that age.
Mm. Yeah, I'm curious about it. All right, I have another one from Petunio. Petunio, as always, has some fantastic questions for us. Petunio says, "What do you feel are the risks of turning an ongoing project into a roguelike? Should it happen?"
Hmm. So of it is that you end up with losing sight of what you're trying to make. Like there's lots of games that like I think it's very very exciting to like do like it's X but roguelike, but like you have to like I think roguelike is a choice that you have to justify to players. Like people need to like understand why you've introduced randomness to it. Like I could just sit here and be like, oh yeah, it's like Zelda but roguelike. Oh, it's like Contra but roguelike. But like when you add like kind of like that randomization to the game, like it needs to like be adding to the gameplay, not just like, oh hey, like like 50% of the time you're not like getting to play the game you want to play it. Like you need to make sure that kind of like all the options they're giving to players are valuable. And I think we're living in an age of like pick three roguelikes. Like we like like Vampire Survivors, like any like triple A implementation of roguelike tends to be like there's 3 cards on your screen laid out horizontally, and you like click one of them. Even in your auto chess type games, you're seeing augments that are like that. And uh like some people, like I think are like throwing in roguelike as like an afterthought, and it's something that like it should be core to the DNA. So like pivoting into roguelike, you have to like think really hard about like why are you trying to turn this game roguelike? Because if
Mm.
you can't come up with a good reason, there's probably like a reason why you didn't think of your game as a roguelike in the first place.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think it is the there are times where something accidentally will become wonderful in your design iteration, where you'll be like, oh, this thing that we just kind of put in as a throwaway actually is like what everybody loves. But I feel like that is a lot less common than intentionally making choices. So don't just make a roguelike because don't just turn your game into a roguelike, I should say, because you want to. I think, as you said, that's a perfect answer. Like there needs to be a good reason. The player needs to go like, oh, I see why this is going to be special because it's a roguelike. Because that's a core part of why this is going to be a delightful experience. Yeah, what for
Exactly.
me?
Like,
Yeah.
oh, sorry. The thing I cherish the most, I think, in the roguelike space is like that I can do that, moment where
Yeah.
like as a player you're surprised by like the emergent gameplay, and then like if that's something that you notice in your game, then that is like what you should like really dig down into as the roguelike kind of peak of roguelike experience.
Mhm.
Do we have time for another question, William?
Yeah, why don't we do one last one?
Yeah, so Joker asked, how do you balance story and roguelike without making it too focused on combat to the point where the player loses the narrative?
I think that it would go back to, like the quote unquote very hard question. Like stories and roguelike, I think is something that we haven't solved yet. And
Mm.
uh I think one thing that I guess Hades 2 and I are trying it out right now, and it's a little bit of an experiment, is the idea of multiple runs in a roguelike. So, like going back all the way back to like, Slay the Spire, FT or whatnot. Like there's like the one mission that you do and like that's it. And like in Hades 2, you'll see that there's like the run where you go upstairs and the run where you go downstairs. And
Yeah,
in our game, like we have kind of like these missions that have the roguelike structure to them, but like after you finish like kind of the mission where you rescue someone's pet, then the next mission is going to be a mission where you're doing different things and you have like slightly different mechanics to them. And I think that that's a new narrative space that haven't really been explored yet. So I'm looking forward to seeing people try that out.
yeah,
Yeah, it reminds me of how like From Software does narrative, where there are absolutely like real narrative beats, but a lot of the narrative happens just from playing the game and sort of experiencing the world. A lot of actual like contextual storytelling rather than direct storytelling, um, and getting those little bits and pieces that you put together yourself. That's almost like a satisfying way of creating a world. It's like a Blair Witch Project or something. Like because you never see the monster, you get to decide what it is yourself. And in this case, because you're only getting little bits of the story at a time, you get to decide what this universe is, and slowly over time, you get your theories confirmed or denied. All right, I think that will wrap us up because we are coming to the end of our time. So before we go, we like to do two different things on this podcast.
So, first of all, Lauren, do you have some extra credit our listeners can do in the next week to apply what they may have learned here today?
I think we actually did circle around the topic a little bit, but we haven't actually addressed it directly. So here's the question for extra credit: is what's something that traditional games or like non-roguelike games do that like roguelikes cannot do? I think figuring out that line is going to be like the like really powerful for you to like understand the strength of both roguelikes and the strength of non-roguelikes, like why you would choose one over the other.
Perfect. So, you heard it there, folks. Think on that question. If you feel comfortable, maybe post the answer on LinkedIn or in our Discord. Tag us, tag Lauren, so we can have a look at it and learn from you as well, perhaps. Um, so that's everything. Before we go, Lauren, do you have anything that you'd like to promote or any words of wisdom? And Willem, I stole your line. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Um, as an indie game dev, especially working in a roguelike space, like we value feedback massively. So if Soulmates, if like a space overcooked style game sounds like mildly appealing to you, please go check it out. We have our demo available now, and we're always listening for more feedback. Like every week we're adding things to the game that's like something that someone suggested in our Discord. So uh check it out and come tell me whether you like the game or not.
The
Brilliant.
demo is already pretty fully fleshed out as well. It is already, of course, multiplayer, so you and a couple buddies can grab it and have a go to space together.
I think we should
All
stream
right.
it sometime, Willem.
I would love to. Let's do it.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed today's episode, there will be links to join our Discord down below. We're here every single Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And anything else we mentioned in the episode will also be there in the link, there
Yeah.
in the
And
description.
I think we're actually off next week, if I'm not mistaken, right, Willem? For bank
Oh, yes, we
holiday.
are. We are indeed.
So catch us in 2 weeks at 12 p.m. Eastern Time in the Indie Game Academy Discord, Twitch, LinkedIn, and various other channels that I may have forgotten. You'll see the links in the descriptions.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank everybody for being here. And Lauren, thank you for your time. That was awesome.
Thank
Thank you.
you. It was so fun.
Bye
Goodbye,
bye.
all. See you again in 2 weeks. Go eat a lot of food for us. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Game over.
Adios.